Hello and welcome back to another update. This is with regards to the Syrian civil war. While everything else is in the works, I'll be focusing on the daily updates as the others take way more time. Focusing on the latest developments over the past 2 days, the most significant developments have happened in regards to Aleppo. The Syrian government forces attempted a counterattack and managed to recapture some settlements. However, the rebels managed to push them back and regain control over those areas. This subsequently led to the rebels making additional advances here to the southeast of Aleppo into the countryside where the Decisive region is present. There is room for a lot of movement in these areas because there's hardly any areas to set up defensive points, and therefore the majority of the fighting here is mostly ambushes and rapid movement, which is extremely difficult for the rebels to deal with because they do not have a lot of armored vehicles and such. But with drone reconnaissance and some ambush points, they're able to withstand against Syrian government assaults. Therefore, it's likely not going to be much movement in the eastern parts post this. The main fighting is taking place, as I predicted, in the direction of Hama, where the rebel forces and the government forces are building up both sides near Hama, the government forces within the city and the rebel forces on the outskirts of it, as they prepare for a massive battle that is already taking place. Both sides are sending additional reinforcements to the city, where the objective is to fight over it. Whoever wins this battle can determine the outcome of the current situation, because we are currently at the active phase of the civil war. If the rebels come out on top, they'll be able to capture the city of Hama, and it will significantly increase and bolster their morale and decrease government forces' morale, while a government victory over the Battle of Hama will allow them to switch the fighting around and point it towards Idlib here in the southern parts of the rebel control, and then move on towards Aleppo past that, and the situation will completely switch around. But if the rebel forces come out on top, they can move towards Homs. Fighting over that city will cut off the connection between Damascus and the coast, and it will significantly complicate the situation for the government forces, especially since the city of Homs is more sympathetic to the rebels than Hama is. Therefore, battle over Homs would be more difficult for the government forces in the Battle of Hama, and it will likely end up in a situation where the rebels could gain control over both cities, and then the battle over the coast would commence, and at that point the rebels would control the majority of the country, more so than what the government forces control, and they can consolidate those positions to turn the situation around. At the same time, this Russian presence within Syria is reliant on the ports. This means if the rebel forces gain control over the ports, then the Russians would have to negotiate with the rebel forces rather than the government forces over the continuous stay in the country. The rebel forces are already attempting to negotiate with Russia, where they are saying that they will keep the same condition as the government forces have offered them. They just need to stop bombing them and stay neutral in this conflict, and then they'll let them stay and keep their bases and so on. The Russians have continued bombing, and they have clearly prioritized one side over the other, where they are fully supporting the government in Syria, together with Iran and Hezbollah, as well as Shia militias in Iraq. They all support the government forces in Syria, while the only backers of the rebel forces seems to be Turkey. So while we're seeing what is currently happening is that the rebel forces are making continuous advances in the direction of Hama and in the Aleppo countryside, they also started an offensive towards the Kurdish-held northern Syria, where they are fighting over the city of Manbij. The rebel forces have managed to cut off the connection west of Lake Assad, and this has isolated the city of Manbij in the western bank of the Euphrates River. This means that they are looking to force the Kurds to withdraw across the river line, where they then can establish a front line along the Euphrates River and move down south to focus on the government forces while having a strong flank along the river line, separating the Kurdish and rebel control regions. In conclusion, a decisive battle is taking place near Hama, which can decide the next weeks of the battles here in the Syrian conflict and may even decide the entire war, as both sides concentrate majority of their forces in this direction, and the rebels are on the offensive, looking to enter the city. They previously managed to get to the outskirts of the city, but a Syrian government counterattack managed to push them back. The Syrian rebels are working on gaining control over the tank division military base located here to the northeast of Hama. It has several trenches and fortified positions located within it, so it's a heavily fortified position. If the rebels want to get a foothold within Hama, they need to gain control over it. They did previously gain control of it, but as mentioned, a government counterattack managed to push them back out of it. So heavy fighting is continuing near the city, where the rebel forces are looking to gain control over the surrounding settlements of Muhrada here in the northwest, the base in the northeast, before entering the city itself. Back in Aleppo, the rebel forces are still fighting some Kurdish remnants within the city. They are setting up ambush points and snipers where they are attempting to inflict as many casualties as possible on the rebel forces, while at the same time the rebel forces are also clearing all of the military bases within and around the city, which they managed to capture quickly. This has led to several armored vehicles being abandoned, like this T-90A tank, which the rebels managed to capture. They already have a T-90A tank, which they captured in 2016, so they have been able to train some crews in some of these tanks, including the T-90 tank. So this means they can repair it and make use of it, as they already are with the current one that they have. At the same time, there is video as this one where the rebel forces found a armored vehicle stash where there are 9 BMPs, 1 T-72 and 1 T-55, which they managed to capture. We also see the most recent videos of the conflict. They went from fully pickup trucks to now also including infantry fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers and tanks in their offensive operations. They managed to capture a lot of equipment in Aleppo, and this has strengthened their military capabilities significantly. Finally, the Kurdish forces took advantage of the situation in the northwest to launch an offensive towards the government foothold across the river line, the Euphrates River line, where they attempted to gain control over the settlements on the northern bank of the river line. However, they have so far been unable to do so. They did this with air support from the United States, including this footage of an A-10 fighter jet, which was providing close air support for the Kurdish forces, yet they failed to gain control over the riverbank, as the Syrian government forces have troops stationed there and a defensive line prepared, as this is a part of the war which was not paused, and the Kurds and the government forces were constantly fighting here on the riverbank, and this foothold across is a very important one for the government forces to launch further offensive operations into the Kurdish-held regions. Therefore, while the Kurds and the government forces are working together against the rebel forces in the northwestern parts of Syria due to their sudden offensive, this does not mean that they are suddenly friends. Instead, they will continue fighting each other as well. As the saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. In Syria, it goes, the enemy of my enemy is my enemy. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.